Donald Trump did not begin his response with evidence. Donald Trump did not begin with photographs. Donald Trump began with anger. The moment the letter surfaced, Donald Trump did not respond with explanation or reflection. Donald Trump responded with mockery. "This is not me," Donald Trump said flatly. "I never wrote a picture in my life. I never painted a novel. I never baked a song." The words from Donald Trump were absurd, almost cartoonish, and that was intentional because ridicule is a shield. If you can make people laugh, you do not have to make them think. For 4 years, Donald Trump has repeated the same core claim whenever one name appears beside his own. Jeffrey Epstein barely knew him. Not a friend, not close, never part of the inner circle. Donald Trump said it in interviews. Donald Trump said it on stage at rallies. Donald Trump said it online again and again until repetition itself was meant to sound like truth. According to Donald Trump's version of events, Epstein was a footnote, a background character who wandered briefly through a very large social scene and then disappeared forever. And for a long time, that story from Donald Trump survived, not because it was proven, but because it was loud. Then something unusual happened on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert did not challenge Donald Trump directly. Stephen Colbert did not argue with the claim from Donald Trump. Stephen Colbert did not even sound skeptical. Instead, Stephen Colbert replayed Donald Trump's denial calmly, almost respectfully, nodding along as if he were hearing it for the first time. When the clip of Donald Trump ended, Stephen Colbert leaned forward and said something that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "Memory is a funny thing," Stephen Colbert said. The studio did not laugh. They leaned in. "Luckily," Stephen Colbert continued, "cameras do not forget." The lights dimmed slightly. The tone shifted from comedy to something heavier. Not confrontation, but exposure. Stephen Colbert made one thing very clear. Stephen Colbert was not offering opinions. Stephen Colbert was not speculating. Stephen Colbert was not accusing. Stephen Colbert was offering a timeline. Before the images appeared, Stephen Colbert reminded viewers why timelines matter, especially now, because this was not happening in a vacuum. Donald Trump had just been found guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money case. After 11 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was read. For the first time in American history, a former U.S. president had been convicted of a crime. Sentencing was scheduled for July 11th. This context mattered, not as an attack, but as a reminder. We were no longer dealing with hypotheticals. We were dealing with records. Then the screen behind Stephen Colbert changed. The first photograph appeared. It showed Donald Trump and Epstein laughing together at Mar-a-Lago in the 1990s. No tension, no distance, no body language that suggested strangers. Stephen Colbert did not rush. Stephen Colbert let the image sit in silence. "This," Stephen Colbert said gently, "is what barely knowing someone looked like before Instagram." The audience reacted not with applause, but recognition. A second photo followed. Again, Donald Trump and Epstein stood side by side, relaxed, smiling, surrounded by guests. Stephen Colbert pointed out their posture, the comfort, the ease. "People do not stand like this with strangers," Stephen Colbert said. "This is not awkward proximity. This is familiarity." The denial from Donald Trump, once loud and confident, was beginning to feel fragile, and the night was just getting started. The second image had already weakened the story from Donald Trump. The third one shattered it. As the screen behind Stephen Colbert changed again, the room shifted in a way you cannot fake. Not louder, quieter. The photo showed Donald Trump leaning in as Jeffrey Epstein whispered something into his ear. Not a stage pose, not a stiff handshake. This was private space, the kind people do not give to strangers. Stephen Colbert did not comment right away. Stephen Colbert let the silence stretch long enough for viewers at home to feel uncomfortable, because discomfort is where denial starts to crack. "Nobody invades personal space like that," Stephen Colbert finally said, voice calm, "unless they feel entitled to be there." That single sentence did more damage than 1,000 accusations ever could. Then Stephen Colbert reminded viewers of another detail that had quietly resurfaced. A report that in 2003, Donald Trump allegedly sent Epstein a birthday letter that was sexually suggestive in tone. Stephen Colbert did not dramatize it. Stephen Colbert did not read it aloud with mockery. Stephen Colbert did not pile on outrage. Stephen Colbert simply placed it next to the images. That was the pattern of the night from Stephen Colbert. No shouting, no moral grandstanding, just juxtaposition. The fourth photo appeared. This one showed Donald Trump and Epstein at a public event, both enjoying the attention, cameras flashing, people gathered around them. This was not coincidence. This was not a random encounter. This was a shared social world. Stephen Colbert sighed lightly, as if the conclusion had become unavoidable. "Now I understand," Stephen Colbert said. "When Donald Trump says he was not with Epstein, he must mean emotionally, because socially, physically, and publicly, they were very much together." That line landed harder than any joke, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise. Then came the fifth image. This one felt different. No spotlight, no stage smiles, no crowd, just Donald Trump and Epstein. Casual, unguarded, caught in a moment that looked unplanned. The kind of moment people assume will never be questioned later. Stephen Colbert's voice lowered. "This one matters," Stephen Colbert said, "because this is how people look when they believe no one will ever ask." The studio did not clap. They understood what Stephen Colbert meant. When powerful people are relaxed around each other in private moments, it tells you something about the nature of the relationship, not the legality of anything, but the closeness. Stephen Colbert turned back to the camera. "This is not about assigning crimes," Stephen Colbert said carefully. "This is not about guilt." Then Stephen Colbert paused. "It is about honesty." You could feel the difference in tone. This was not late-night TV anymore. This was narrative collision. What someone says about the past meeting, what the past recorded without permission. "You can say you did not know what someone was doing behind closed doors," Stephen Colbert continued, "but you cannot say you did not know someone you repeatedly welcomed into your world." The audience began to applaud, and Stephen Colbert raised his hand to stop them. "Context matters," Stephen Colbert said. And then Stephen Colbert did something even more devastating. Stephen Colbert repeated Donald Trump's own past quote about Epstein, the remark about him liking women on the younger side. "No spin, no paraphrasing, no commentary. That is not my interpretation," Stephen Colbert said quietly. "That is a recording." At this point, denial from Donald Trump no longer sounded confident. It sounded rehearsed. And rehearsed stories fall apart when they meet documentation. When powerful people rewrite history, Stephen Colbert said, they are counting on time to blur the details. They are betting that repetition will replace reality. Stephen Colbert leaned back, folding his hands. But evidence does not fade just because someone wants it to. The segment from Stephen Colbert ended without a punchline, no dramatic sting, no applause cue, just one final sentence. You can deny facts, you can attack messengers, you can shout louder, but photographs do not argue. They do not care who is running for office, they just exist. That silence at the end, that was the sound of a narrative collapsing without anyone raising their voice. Stephen Colbert had set the stage carefully. Within minutes of the segment from Stephen Colbert ending on The Late Show, the internet did what it always does when it smells blood in the water. The clip did not trend because it was funny. It trended because it felt controlled. No yelling, no chaos, just facts placed beside claims from Donald Trump and silence left to do the damage. Supporters of Donald Trump rushed to defend him online. Some said the photos meant nothing. Others claimed they were taken out of context. A few insisted this was all a media setup designed to smear Donald Trump before another election cycle. But here's the problem with visual evidence. You can argue about interpretation. You cannot argue that the image does not exist. Cable news picked it up within hours. Pundits slowed the footage down, zoomed in on expressions, body language, spacing, not because body language proves guilt, but because it exposes comfort. And comfort is the one thing Donald Trump had insisted never existed between him and Jeffrey Epstein. That contradiction became the headline, not what happened between them, but that Donald Trump's version of the past no longer matched what the public could see with their own eyes. By the next morning, every political panel was asking the same question in different ways. If the relationship was so distant, why do they look so familiar? That is when Donald Trump responded. Not with evidence, not with clarification, not with dates or explanations, with anger. Donald Trump went on social media and unloaded. Donald Trump attacked Stephen Colbert. Donald Trump attacked the network. Donald Trump attacked the press. Donald Trump accused everyone of lying, of being corrupt, of running a coordinated smear campaign. What Donald Trump did not do was address the photographs. That absence was louder than any insult, because when you have proof on your side, you show it. When you do not, you shout. And this time, the shouting from Donald Trump did not work the way it used to. News outlets replayed Donald Trump's denial next to the images again and again, not with commentary, just side by side. Claim from Donald Trump, image, claim from Donald Trump, image. Viewers did not need to be told what to think. They could see the mismatch. Then something more subtle happened. Late night hosts across the board stopped making it about Donald Trump's personality and started making it about pattern. Not Donald Trump is lying, but power often lies when it feels exposed. That shift changed the conversation. It was not partisan anymore. It was structural. How often do powerful people rewrite history once they believe time has erased the receipts? How often do they rely on repetition to replace memory? How often does noise work until it suddenly does not? Clips from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert were now being analyzed by media scholars, not just fans. They pointed out how rare it is in modern political entertainment to let evidence sit without commentary, no framing, no emotional direction, just presentation. That is what made it dangerous, because outrage burns fast. But calm exposure lingers. Behind the scenes, reports started circulating that Donald Trump's team was furious, not because the segment accused him of anything illegal, but because it refused to play the game of spectacle. There was no joke to attack, no insult to counter, no punchline to deflect, only a quiet contradiction. And contradictions do not go viral because they are funny. They go viral because they make people uneasy. Supporters tried to pivot the story. What about other politicians? What about other scandals? Why focus on this now? But the audience had already absorbed the core issue. You can deny the meaning of an image. You cannot deny its existence. By day 2, even neutral commentators were saying the same thing. This did not damage Donald Trump because of what it accused him of. It damaged him because it showed him trying to rewrite a past that cameras preserved. That is when the tone of Donald Trump's responses changed. The posts became sharper. The insults became more personal. The attacks on the media became more frantic, which only reinforced the perception that something had slipped out of his control. Because confidence does not spiral, panic does. And for the first time in a long while, the usual strategy from Donald Trump, drown it in noise, attack everyone, dominate the cycle, was not dominating anything. The story would not move on. It just kept sitting there, quiet, unarguable. By the third day, something strange happened. The story did not explode. It did not burn out. It did not get replaced by the next scandal. It just stayed. Every major outlet was still looping the same few seconds from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Not the jokes, not the applause, the pause. That calm moment where Stephen Colbert placed Donald Trump's words next to images of Jeffrey Epstein and then stepped out of the way. No narration, no accusation, just contrast. Media analysts started calling it the anti-clip. In a culture built on outrage, it refused to escalate. And because it refused, it stuck. Donald Trump's team tried every classic move. Call it fake news, attack the messenger, change the subject, flood the timeline with unrelated controversies, turn it into a culture war. None of it worked because there was nothing to argue with. The photos did not care about spin. They did not react to insults. They did not get defensive. They just existed. And that is what broke the rhythm. Usually political scandals follow a pattern: shock, outrage, counter, fatigue, move on. This one stalled in the middle. People kept coming back to the same question. If this was nothing, why does the response from Donald Trump feel so frantic? That question spread quietly, not as a chant, not as a meme, as a doubt. And doubt is more dangerous than anger. Anger unites your base. Doubt fractures it. Some supporters began to soften their language, not turning against Donald Trump, but hedging. Well, maybe he knew him socially. Everyone in those circles crossed paths. Photos do not prove intent. Notice the shift. The story was not about innocence anymore. It was about redefining the claim. Donald Trump had said he barely knew Epstein. Now defenders were saying, okay, maybe he knew him, but that does not mean anything. That is how narratives retreat, not by admitting they were wrong, but by quietly moving the goalposts. And once the goalposts move, the original denial is already dead. Stephen Colbert had created something that lingered. Late night hosts stopped referencing the clip as a takedown. They started referencing it as a case study, not about Donald Trump specifically, but about what happens when power tries to rewrite memory in the age of permanent records. Because this was not about guilt or innocence. It was not even about Epstein anymore. It was about credibility. When you say something did not happen and evidence shows it did, people do not just question that one claim. They start questioning everything else. That is the real cost. Not cancellation, not embarrassment, erosion. Trust does not collapse in one moment. It leaks out slowly when contradictions stack up and never get resolved. In interviews days later, Donald Trump continued to attack the media. Donald Trump continued to dismiss the segment from Stephen Colbert. Donald Trump continued to repeat that the relationship was insignificant, but the repetition did not land the same way because the audience had already seen the contrast. And once people see the gap between words from Donald Trump and reality, no amount of volume can close it. That is why this moment lasted, not because it was dramatic, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet in a world addicted to noise. The segment from Stephen Colbert did not humiliate anyone. It did something worse. It removed the escape routes. No joke to deflect, no outrage to fight, no villain to blame, just evidence sitting next to denial, and the denial blinking first. In the end, the most damaging part was not what Stephen Colbert said. It was what Stephen Colbert did not say. Stephen Colbert did not accuse. Stephen Colbert did not editorialize. Stephen Colbert did not moralize. Stephen Colbert just showed the past and let the present struggle to explain it. And when power cannot explain itself, it loses the one thing it needs most: control of the story. That is why this moment did not fade. That is why it kept being replayed. And that is why, long after the insults from Donald Trump were forgotten, the images stayed, because noise fades, but contrast sticks. Stephen Colbert had placed the denial from Donald Trump next to the photographs and stepped back. The silence did the rest. Supporters tried every defense, but the visual record remained. The comfort in those photos told its own story. Donald Trump had claimed distance. The images showed familiarity. That gap became the story. Not crime, not guilt, but honesty. And once honesty is questioned, everything else follows. The segment from Stephen Colbert did not need to shout. It simply showed. And showing, in the age of endless noise, turned out to be the most powerful thing of all. The public kept returning to the same images: Donald Trump and Epstein laughing, Donald Trump leaning in, Donald Trump relaxed in private moments. Each viewing reinforced the same point. The denial sounded different now. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded fragile. Stephen Colbert had not destroyed a reputation with outrage. Stephen Colbert had simply refused to let the past be rewritten without challenge. The quiet contrast did what loud attacks never could. It lingered. It made people pause. It made them look again. And looking again is where doubt begins. Donald Trump continued his pattern of response, attack the messenger, change the subject, repeat the denial louder. But the pattern itself became part of the story. The more Donald Trump shouted, the more the quiet images stood out. The more Donald Trump attacked, the more the contrast sharpened. Stephen Colbert had built a trap made of silence and evidence. Donald Trump walked into it by refusing to address the core issue. The photographs did not argue. They simply existed. And existence in the end was enough. The moment became a lesson in modern power. Loud denial works until it meets permanent record. Repetition works until it meets visual proof. Anger works until it meets calm presentation. Stephen Colbert had shown the difference between noise and clarity. The segment did not fade because it did not need to escalate. It simply placed truth next to claim and let the audience decide. In a world full of shouting, that quiet decision carried more weight than any scream. Donald Trump had spent years shaping his narrative. Stephen Colbert had spent one segment showing the cracks in it. The public saw both. And once seen, the cracks could not be unseen. The denial from Donald Trump continued, but it rang hollow against the images. The story did not end with outrage. It ended with recognition. And recognition, once planted, grows on its own.